Really? Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Wayne. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. There's a different viewpoint for me.
It's not so bad.
Mr. Demikoff,
Yes.
can you hear us with the new microphone?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
Loud and clear. You have to just
Awesome.
instruct everybody how to use them now.
Hi, how you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing today?
So can you hear me?
Simone. Can you hear everybody? Yep.
Yes, I could hear you.
Okay.
So Michelle, can you hear me?
I can. Yes. Can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Mr. Demikoff, is this generally a pretty quick meeting?
Well, that depends on you.
I mean, anything would be quick in comparison to what I've been through the first couple of meetings, but.
Michelle, please call me Wayne when we're not informal, with, you know, without formalities.
No,
Please.
if you're talking, you have to.
Depends how many questions the board has, how many questions the public might have. You know, it's hard to say. I hope it's short.
Hopefully not.
Right.
Hello? Hello.
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 Hey, Chris.
How are you? Are we the only?
No, there's a couple of us on here, I think. Belinda. Wow, everybody. We had a whole slew of people.
We do, yep. There are
I'm
about
on
5 of us.
phones. I don't know how to do that, but how are everybody?
Oh, they're pledging.
The fashion show.
Oh, you're attending the fashion show? Nice.
Yes, so hopefully be able to get back in soon. Hey guys, how are you? What? I parked down there. I'm gonna be back. I just have a meeting. I gotta go and then I'll be back. Thank you though. Thanks, man. Nobody. Hi, how are you? Oh, I should mute myself, right? Sorry, guys.
Like a walkie-talkie.
I'm going to start by reading the Open Public Meetings Act statement. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Ridgefield Park Board of Education has caused notice of the meeting to be published by having the date and time and place thereof posted in the Bergen Record Municipal Building, Board of Education offices, and district website. Public participation will be conducted both in person and virtually through Zoom. All public will be muted throughout the meeting. Public participation comments are limited to 5 minutes. The public will be able to speak and be seen by the board when participating virtually, telephonically via Zoom. Individuals participating virtually that wish to make comments during public participation will need to raise their hand by clicking the blue hand icon at the bottom of their Zoom window. Participating by telephone that wish to make comments during public participation will need to hit *9 on their telephone to raise their hand. The Business Administrator Board Secretary will then unmute individuals one at a time to speak in the order that their hand was raised. I'm going to take the roll call. Mr. Feitros? Mr. Gibbons?
Here.
Mr. Gomes?
Here.
Mrs. McNeil?
Here.
Dr. Martinez?
Here.
Mrs. Orth?
Here.
Mrs. Rodriguez?
Here.
Mr. Rosselli?
Here.
Mr. Cathcart?
Here.
And President Fernandez.
Here.
You were able to hear me, correct? I didn't just test.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm presenting the proposed budget for 22-23 in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. So I hope you enjoy it. Important dates to note, obviously today is March 23rd and board will be approving the preliminary budget. On March 28th, that is the deadline for the preliminary budget to be sent to the county office. And on April 28th, there will be a Board of Education final approved budget at a public hearing. Just as Dr. Haines always talks about district goals, I wanted to talk about our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the form of a SWOT analysis, because I think it's important to see where we're strong, where we're weak, and how we can improve on those things and what opportunities we can seize and minimize threats. So first, the strengths that I've listed on the SWOT analysis is we had an increase in state aid for 22-23, and you'll see more of those details later in the presentation. I know that some of you think that a state-appointed monitor to oversee the fiscal operations is a difficult thing, and it's not a great thing, and I can certainly understand that. But from my point of view, it's actually, I consider it a strength, because I was working in Essex County and I saw what happened to Newark when the state came in and took them over. So this really isn't the worst thing that could happen, because if there were more problems or additional deficits, the state could come in, fire the board, fire the superintendent, and really take over complete control, and there would be no local control. So I consider that to be a very positive thing, to have someone kind of watching out for us. Another strength that I see is seasoned staff, as well as highly motivated new staff. We also now have one-to-one technology for students in K-12 classrooms. And during the pandemic, and it has also continued into this year, the district provided connectivity to families to support student learning. So we made sure that all students had access to Wi-Fi. Moving on to the weaknesses, and I'll explain a little bit more about the first one in another slide, but we had a reduction in our tax levy due to the new health plans that were introduced in July of 2020. And I'll explain that later in the presentation. We have exceptionally high legal costs. We have unsettled collective bargaining agreements. And because we are overseen by a state monitor, we have limited surplus. The past 2 years, most districts were allowed to maintain a 4% surplus, but because we are monitored by the state, we're only allowed to maintain a 1.5 surplus. So we are running pretty thin. As we all know, our infrastructure and our buildings are in need of updating, and we're starting to do that. And one of the biggest weaknesses is our space constraints. We have a lot of, we have shortage of storage and classroom space. Moving on to the opportunities, I think that it's important to strengthen our internal controls. And one of the ways I plan to do that with, of course, board approval would be processing the payroll in-house. Right now, we process the payroll through ADP, and it's very hard to integrate our payroll with our personnel software. There's a big disconnect there. So that's something that I would like to implement, and it has to be on a calendar year. So we'll start looking into that. If it gets approved, we'll start looking into that in July. And we'll have to run two systems simultaneously just to ensure that our numbers in the new system are correct. We would like to purchase frontline absence management and attendance software. And I think when this was originally introduced, the teachers thought that it was a system where they would clock in and out, and that's not what this is. This is absence management so that employees could request time off electronically. They could see their absence balances, their sick day balances, their vacation balances. And they could also, if a teacher is sick in the evening, she could request a substitute electronically and get the word out to the substitute pool without having to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and call someone. So I think there's a big advantage to having that software, and most districts in New Jersey use that, and I think we're using a very outdated system. Another thing we talked about is purchasing transportation software. We haven't really decided yet what kind of software, what level we need. Is it just for routing? Will it be for security inside and outside the buses? That's something that we need to talk about, but we did put, I think it was $44,000 into the budget for a high-level software system for transportation. The next thing is the cybersecurity audit. That's something that I had done when I was with the Ed Services Commission, and it's really fabulous. They go through all your areas of payroll, personnel, all kinds of, they look at everything to identify vulnerabilities and make suggestions about how we can improve. And I want to thank you all for your support. Last week, we actually already have a policy with Cowbell, and the deductible for that starts at $1,000. So that's going to be the max out of pocket should anything happen. And then the New Jersey SIG policy would kick in at $500,000. So we're very well protected right now. I would like to explore ESIP construction projects, which are energy savings. One of those kinds of things is making sure that all our schools are filled with LED lights. Some of the projects that we're doing with the ventilators would fall into that category, but working with ESIP, they actually do an energy audit and again, give you ideas about how you might be able to save money on energy and utilities costs. We would like to secure more grant funding. And another thing that we talked about at one of our committee meetings was to value all employees, provide opportunities for professional development and personal growth so that they all feel that they're satisfied and happy in their positions here and they don't leave, because it's turnover is costly and it's nice to bring stability to the district. The threats, we know about the cybersecurity data breach. That's always a threat. I don't know if it's just me, but I've heard, I don't know if they're rumors, or I've heard about possible new strains of COVID variants. God help us, I hope not, but we might face high absenteeism due to COVID continuing. We do have difficulty finding substitutes, but hopefully implementing frontline absence management will help us with that. Rising costs, inflation is, that is really hitting us hard in terms of the cost of gas, but also when we went out to bid for certain projects, we've seen that we're coming in over budget. So inflation is a big threat. And again, overcrowding due to land development. And we've had many discussions with Mr. Cathcart about the building that is coming to Ridgefield Park and the incoming students that will be here, I guess, in around 5 years or so. And we do need to start thinking about that. We recently had, unfortunately, this is a little bit of bad news, that we had an adjustment to our tax levy. I think I explained in the last presentation that there was an adjustment to our 21-22 tax levy because the state was under the impression that all districts would save money on health benefits by implementing a different type of health savings plan. And we did show a savings, but the savings isn't all attributed to this Chapter 44 and new health plan. So I am appealing this adjustment in the 21-22 tax levy. But as it stands now, they've taken $838,957 off of our 21-22 tax levy, bringing the subtotal to $26,570,644. And then we get a 2% increase on top of that, which brings the total 22-23 tax levy to $27,102,057. And you can see that that's actually less than the 22-23 tax levy as it stands now is less than the 21-22 tax levy. Okay, these are our different sources of revenue, and the local tax levy, which I just spoke about, to $27,102,057. We saw an increase in state aid, and you'll see more details about that later in the presentation. Another source of revenue is from Little Ferry. We receive regular ed students, shared students, special needs students, and then we also have elementary students coming in from Bogota and Maywood. Withdrawal from capital's reserve is considered a revenue, and the $503,550 are for two projects. One is for the roof at 98 Central, and the other one is, yeah, but I'll get back to it. I'll get you that before the end of the presentation. So the roof, and then what was the other? Okay. We also have transportation revenue, and that has pretty much been flat for the past few years. This past year, we had joint routes with Dumont and Teaneck, in addition to Little Ferry. I'm hesitant to count on the Dumont and Teaneck because that really depends on if they have students attending the same out-of-district schools that we do, but we put that in there. Miscellaneous revenue, which includes sales from gov deals, E-rate funding, refunds and adjustments to purchases and payroll, and a shared bus coordinator with Little Ferry and a shared guidance counselor with Little Ferry. So they pay us to share those services. We also get semi-Medicaid, which is additional federal funding for students that are severely disabled, and it's based on the level of disability. Interest income from our funds in the bank. And the total general operating budget in Fund 10 is $47,125,636. Okay, now we go to the special revenue fund. And this is really basically all kinds of federal grants. And we budget for this at 85% of the current year's funding because it's something that we can't always count on. So we try to be conservative in budgeting for these monies, and these are very restricted. We have to use them for the purposes that they were intended. We can't take IDEA money and buy a new computer or desktop with that. It's very specific to the type of grant. So we budgeted for $1,104,161, bringing the total revenue to $48,229,799. And of course, the budget has to balance, so the total expenditures have to equal the total revenues. The first line of the expenses is the general fund, which is we pay all of our operating expenses for the most part out of that account. That's what you're approving when you approve the bills list. That's all the money that's coming from that fund. The expenditures in that fund, $45,784,245. We also have capital outlay expenditures, and this is not just capital in terms of capital projects. Any equipment that's purchased that is valued over $2,000 has to be capitalized and added to our fixed assets report. So anything in this capital outlay would be considered equipment and also projects. We have summer programs and there is a cost involved in running those programs, and the cost is $157,987. And then when resident students transfer to a charter school, we are obligated to provide funding to the charter school. And we are estimating an expense for the charter school in the amount of $47,429. Total general operating budget for expenditures is $47,125. $47,125,636. The special revenue fund, as I spoke about before, $1,104,163, bringing the total expenditures to $48,229,799, and that's a balanced budget. This was a slide that was included in the last presentation, and just wanted to show that we did get an increase in state aid. Our equalization aid increased by 1.86 million, and that's a good thing because equalization funding is not restricted as the other funds are. So we have more, we can take more liberty in how we spend those funds. As you can see, transportation, security aid, special education aid, those things remain flat. This slide is basically comparing state aid from year to year. And you can see that in 22-23, the equalization aid increased by $1.86 million, and that's 20% increase over the prior year. I think I'm on the same page as you. This is basically a pie chart just showing where the majority of our revenues are coming from. And you can see that the local tax levy is a very large source. State aid is a very large source. And we also have substantial tuition revenues coming in. A lot of new technology initiatives planned for 22-23. We're going to be putting LED signage in front of the elementary schools, and we're estimating that to cost a total of $90,000. The next district-wide is also to strengthen our internal controls. Additional security cameras budgeted at $92,000. The frontline absence management that I spoke about before, budgeting that for $18,235, and bringing payroll in-house and integrating it with our personnel system. It is going to be $15,000 plus an extra $6,000 recurring fee above and beyond our current annual cost. So it is a little more costly, but I just think the value of bringing the payroll in-house is substantial. As I had said before, the routing software, we're not exactly sure what kind of software we're purchasing, but we've budgeted top of the line $44,000, which will give us the ability to have cameras inside and outside the buses, GPS, and possible integration with parent apps so that they can see when their students are due to be picked up and due to arrive home. Additional technology initiatives for 22-23, multi-factor authentication, and this ties back into protecting our network. And basically what will happen is, I'm sure many of you, when you log on to an online banking, You have to put in a code that you receive on your phone, and that helps make your technology and your bank account more secure. So that's something that we would like to do, where everyone has to authenticate with 2 different means. High school classroom audio upgrades, which include projectors, short throw projectors, and new HDMI runs. Total of that, we're budgeting $60,000. The next thing, upgrade 5th grade and 9th grade Chromebooks, and that we're going to be doing that annually. Just seems to make sense because the younger students have some of the older computers, and then in 9th grade with the incoming Little Ferry students, it's a nice time for everyone to get the same computers. So we're budgeting $430,000 for that. Deployment software will help when Simone and our technology department has to distribute new computers. So that's something that will be helpful. Active Directory tools, I probably need Dr. Haines to explain a little bit more about that. I believe it's some kind of authentication with somebody, with a person logging into the system, but maybe at the end of the presentation, he can clarify that for us. And we'll be putting Wi-Fi at the high school bus loop. Excuse me, budgeting $18,400. We need that if we're going to put transportation software in. Dr. Haines, would you like to talk about the proposed new personnel at staffing?
Sure. I spoke about some of these. Can you hear me okay, first of all? I spoke about some of these at the last meeting, that our district is in great need of focusing on ELA in K through 6. And some of that comes from inclusion. The county, as they've gone through our QSAC review and has reviewed our assessment scores, and they're going to meet with us again this week, has strongly suggested that we have more inclusive models, and those include something called RTI, response to intervention, when if a student is not performing on grade level, we have people who can ensure that they make progress, whether that's one-to-one, high dosage tutoring, working with those students and making sure that they are meeting the progress at the grade level. And so we've never had this before. So that's including 1 inclusive specialist in each of the elementary schools. Those are the first 3. There was a high school English teacher who the position was not renewed for the past 2 years, and not renewing that high school English teacher means that many of our students don't have electives such as mythology or reading novels or other things. Basic skills is Title I funding. So Title I did used to pay for this teacher at the Roosevelt School, but we don't have, Roosevelt School does not qualify as a Title I school anymore, so we need to put that back into our general fund. The elementary teacher is a new class at the Grant School for an MD multiply disabled classroom that we are opening because we have a need as far as our student population. We have coaches for math and ELA that were built into the budget last year. We're adding a coach for K-6 science this year. Director of Early Childhood Intervention, we've spoken about this position a lot as we look forward to opening up a universal pre-K. This is in the budget now. We expect that we'll be successful in getting what's called the PEEA grants, and that eventually in the year or 2 after our grant is accepted and the state says, yes, you can open universal pre-K, we hope eventually that'll be for ages 3 and 4, but the director's salary would come out of that. But to seed this program, we're putting it in the budget. There's been a huge request for head custodians, and maybe Mrs. Grapstein, you could talk about that more. So proposed 1 head custodian for each of the elementary schools. And then the full-time bus drivers, I'll let you talk about. The high school counselor is something the high school used to have. So that's, again, a reinstated position. And one of the aides that's needed in the district, that's for that Grant School classroom that's opening up, the MD classroom, that's an aide for that classroom.
Yes, we talked about putting a head custodian at each of the elementary schools. The principals have requested that they have a head custodian to coordinate the Delta T workers, and there's nothing like having your own custodian on your own payroll. I think they take more pride in the building, and it's on the wish list. We worked it into the budget, but it would be nice if we could have a head custodian in each building. After CUSAC, when they walked through, they pointed out a few things that probably needed some tightening up. So it would be really nice to have a head custodian, especially since we're losing a maintenance worker, we're losing Anthony, and it would be nice to have head custodians. The full-time bus drivers, I can't promise that that is going to eliminate overtime, because I was told that overtime is largely due to athletics, but at least we will be in compliance with the Department of Labor laws, making these drivers full-time, because can't continue to call them part-time, have them working 60 hours a week. Dr. Haines, this I think is more up your alley too with these new initiatives.
Sure. So we put a lot of money last year into K-6 ELA literature, and I think our community has responded really enthusiastically that our teachers finally have resources that help them to teach culturally responsiveness. They didn't have that till last year. So now we're looking at 7 through 12, looking at the same thing, so that our ELA teachers can look at some of the current resources, literature, novels that they're teaching, and have the resources to change those out to some resources that are more culturally appropriate. The state requires that we teach all of the things listed there: Amistad, Holocaust, LGBTQ history, genocide, and they are requiring climate change. Those are all required in the 2022 New Jersey Student Learning Standards, and that's to provide some help and financial backing for those. ELA Homeschool Connection, we did this year, and that should be rolling out within a week. There were some book order problems, but this is to help our students in their homes to build cultural libraries. Literature libraries. The playground blacktop, and I spoke about this last time too, at each of the elementary schools, especially Grant School. It would be nice if those had some more inviting stencils and academic works like maps of the USA. The ELA Heinemann is for digital subscriptions that correspond to our text subscriptions for teachers, so the students can use their Chromebooks and log on and look at Fontes and Pinnell subscriptions. Licenses and subscriptions for authoritative resources. We did this last year. Those are for things because our students are too used to Googling everything, and we try to ensure that they have authoritative resources where they log on and they use good authoritative encyclopedias, Library of Congress resources, EBSCOhost, and other resources, so they're not Googling everything. And then some regular manipulatives to continue what our teachers are doing, mostly K-6, math anchor charts, and marker boards. Looks like that continues, I think. To the next slide. Yep. So versatiles to continue that initiative. Social studies, we need to continue updating our pull down world charts and globes in the classrooms. They're kind of embarrassing. Hiring the consultant, and I spoke, Wayne and Mrs. Grapstein, I'm sorry, Mr. Demikoff and Mrs. Grapstein and I have had many conversations about outsourcing a consultant who could write the PEA grant for us. This is probably more than is needed, but I'd rather have more than is needed for this person to come in and start working with our local organizations to really put a good feasibility study together and get that grant passed. And that's it.
Okay, these are new facility initiatives for 22-23. We actually are moving forward. There is one resolution that is on the agenda tonight. In addition to the budget, we are moving forward with the unit ventilators at Lincoln School. That will be part of this year's project. But we would like to ideally do 2 additional HVAC projects at the high school to improve the air circulation, and those projects would be paid through ARP funding. The concern is that with inflation and supply chain, that the original budget might not be adequate for these projects, but we'll see when we go out to bid. And now this refreshed my memory, what the $503,000 was for. A roof at 98 Central, and then we talked about a phase 3 of window replacements by the industrial arts wing at the high school. This slide shows the difference between the costs in a commercial culinary kitchen and a domestic culinary kitchen. You can see that commercial culinary is $861,109. The domestic is $636,171. And the difference is the major increases. The cost increases for commercial over domestic, it's electric power, mechanical makeup air, fume hood, Ansel system, structural modifications for the rooftop, and furniture and kitchen equipment. So these are things that we'll need to talk about and make a decision about how to move forward with which project we think would be beneficial to the students. The science project, upgrading the science labs, there are 2 options. One is to keep the configuration basically as is, and the other one is to make basically 3 classrooms out of 2. And you can see there is a significant cost difference. The major increases for option 2 over option 1 are additional electrical power, new construction, patch up and paint, and the finishes with furniture, accessories, casework, and sinks. So we also have a choice to make there. This slide is about the equipment wish list for the elementary schools and the high school. Flex seating is a theme throughout the district. Teachers and principals would like to have more flex seating. And you can see for grant bookcases, chairs and desks, office furniture, and it's pretty much consistent across the schools in their wish list for equipment. Another new initiative is installing water bottle filling stations, which would be advantageous given COVID. It would enable students to fill up their bottles and not have to put their mouths on the water faucets. The other thing that we are in desperate need of is a van, but because of situation with supply chain and the chips not being produced, we're having a very hard time securing a van. And then a storage container would be very helpful to store computers and athletic equipment and would hopefully free up some space in the high school. At this time, we will entertain questions.
I have one. On the new programs for attendance and payroll, is there one program we can get that covers all of it?
The and absence management, the beauty of that is it will speak to or talk to the payroll system so that when substitutes work, we can actually do a data dump into payroll and it will make paying them easier and more accurate. So it's not really that we can get one system, but they do integrate. that's very beneficial. And I think it's a big time savings and just very important for internal controls, because upon retirement, teachers are entitled to sick day payout. It's really important that we keep an accurate record of their absence balances. But unfortunately, there isn't one system, but they do speak to each other and they will work together, which would be really ideal, because right now Dom is doing everything manually.
If I could just add to that, I am familiar with Frontline. I've used it in pretty much every school I've worked in. It is a good system. It works well. It's easy to use. I think it'll be a good addition.
Carrie, I have a follow-up to Dave's question, has to do with the payroll system, bringing it in-house. You mentioned the extra $6K per year to maintain it. Is there any extra personnel cost on, in your staff to run it?
Actually, there won't be any additional staff, but what I would like to do, I would like to have some cross-training, because right now we have one person we are relying on, and that's just a really bad way to do business, because I know payroll, I have a strong payroll background, but I don't know that I want to jump in and do payroll. But part of my plan will be, when we transition, is to cross-train and have Stephanie in my office also sit in on payroll and be a backup. So there won't be any additional costs, not additional employees. It doesn't require hiring. It's possible that if there may be longer hours or a small stipend, but I don't really envision that.
Thank you.
Ms. Grapstein, I just had a quick question regarding this, taking this payroll and making it internal. I know you mentioned that at one point we're going to be running two systems at once. Would that also entail us paying for two services at once? And do you have an anticipated crossover or cutoff date?
Honest, I really don't know that, but I think it's just wise. It's important that we run the two systems simultaneously. So I'll have to find that out to see what the added cost would be, but that would just be a one-time cost. But I can get that information for you.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Grapstein, I have a few questions. One, with respect to upgrading the Chromebooks, is that going to be leased, or are we purchasing new ones?
Be purchasing new ones for the 5th graders and the 9th graders every year.
Okay, thank you. Also, with respect to your wish list for the staffing, the salaries to me seem a bit light. Is that something that you guys went and checked in the market? I mean, a bus driver for $45,000 to me seem a bit light.
Actually, I did talk to Bob about that, and I went back and I did an analysis over the past few years to see what some of the two drivers that are currently part-time and part-time in title, but not part-time in their duties. And they earn between $45,000 and $50,000 over the past few years, just in their hourly timesheets. But this will now give them an option to have benefits, single health insurance, and they'll also be part of the public employees retirement system, which is another huge advantage.
So I have a question about that. So all bus drivers will be full-time?
No, we're just thinking about making 2 additional bus drivers full-time. The others will be part-time.
So 2 additional bus drivers will be full-time with benefits?
There are 2 employees that are currently working, and they're basically working out-time hours. They're just not classified as full-time.
So they are working full-time hours?
Correct.
How about the aides in those buses?
There are, the aides don't. I'll tell you, the main reason that they're working so many hours is because of athletics, and the aides don't go on the buses for athletics. So it shouldn't impact the aides.
So it's a change of status, basically.
The change of status to really be more compliant, because we can't continue to call them part-time and they're working more hours, than everyone in the district. So they will receive benefits. They will receive single benefits, and it's the new plan, which is, it's a cheaper plan. And also on July 1st, the state is introducing another new plan, which will be even less costly. And we're waiting to hear what the parameters of those are and if new employees have to select that plan. But we did budget for these positions with benefits.
So Carrie, that was going to be my question. The total of the new positions was like 920,000. What's the benefit load on that you're budgeting?
The benefit we budgeted for health insurance and dental insurance was 14,337, and then they're entitled to participate in the employee's retirement system, and the employer's cost for that is 15% of their salary.
And Carrie, can I ask, in terms of the revenue that goes along with the transportation that we provide, you mentioned that the revenue was flat for the last couple of years, but it seems like the transportation costs have increased. I mean, certainly they have to have increased during COVID. Is there
That's a very good question. Actually, it was flat from what the state provided us, but it won't be flat for what we charge. We're going to at least add on the CPI, which is 1.91%. So we are going to pass an increase onto the districts that we share routes with.
Is the increase in line with the increases to our actual cost increases, or is there some statutory we can only increase it by so much every year?
Well, technically renewal routes, which I would consider these to be renewal routes, you can only increase them by the CPI. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know that how that would go over too well if we increased it more than that. But the CPI is 1.91, and that's what we're planning to pass on to Little Ferry. And I don't know that we've done that in the past, but I did talk to the school business administrator and said the cost of gas is going up, and we've got to increase the contract. I mean, it's not going to be substantial, but it's a little something.
Do we know what our cost increases have been of late?
I do monitor the gasoline bills, and I do monitor the timesheets, but I haven't really seen any significant increase over the past few months.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask also, you mentioned that our part-time drivers are full-time. We're in correct compliance where we don't have to give benefits because we're under that full-time number, I assume, correct?
Repeat the question, please.
So we said our part-time drivers are full-time. We're in compliance where they don't do an absorbent amount of hours so that we don't have to pay benefits, correct?
The part-time drivers that I was referring to are classified as part-time drivers, but they're working enormous hours. So we're out of compliance with those, but the others that are just driving routes and not doing athletics are still considered part-time and are under the 30 hours a week.
Thank you.
Carrie, I have a couple of questions, and maybe for Dr. Haines as well. It looks like we're about $300,000 short on the home ec and science rooms in order to get them to be the top of the line, CTE compliant and the wish list. I'm wondering if we are building into this budget the ability to finish those projects if for some reason we can't finish them this year?
We actually did budget for basic kitchen and science room. So part of the encumbrances that we have now have accommodations for those classrooms. So we would have to go into capital reserve to get the additional monies. But when I did an analysis, it looked like we have this is a little tricky to explain. So we have 2.8 million in capital reserve that was earmarked for projects in 21-22. Of that $2.8 million, there's culinary that we haven't done, auditorium, backstage, lighting at the high school, the parking loop, the bus loop, and the science room. And when I take out, when I deduct that from the 2.8 that was earmarked for 21-22 projects, we'll have about $673,000 left in that bucket that was earmarked for 21-22. And then we have 1.3 or 1.4 in capital reserve. So we should be okay to do both projects if we take money out of capital reserve. But as I had said before, Lurch, Vinci Higgins is working on end of year projections, and I'm hoping to have them within the next few days. And before I totally commit to that, I would just like to see their professional, projections. But I think that, I do think that if we take out money from capital reserve, we will be able to complete both those projects. It won't leave us with a tremendous amount of excess, but, and I did check with the auditors, any monies that that were taken out for capital reserve in 21-22 but not used will automatically default back to capital reserve. We won't have to do resolutions or anything like that. So when we reconcile at the end of the year, any expenditures that, any monies that we did not expend will automatically go back into capital reserve, and we can pull those out as long as those projects are listed on our long-term, a long-range facilities plan, which they all are.
And Carrie, I'd like to weigh in there too, because the board should know there was a really nice conversation and collaboration between Mrs. Grapstein and myself and Mr. Demikoff, and that was of the new budget initiatives of those 990,000 that we were looking at. I was originally planning to take $200,000 or $300,000 out at least to make sure that the culinary room could be commercial and to make sure the science room, as the new blueprints are, would create 3 classrooms at the high school. And as we went back and forth, Mrs. Grapstein realized that it probably wasn't necessary as long as we're using capital reserve. So I used the new budget initiatives to go back into the classrooms, the kind of classroom supplies that you saw, the additional textbooks and other things. So that's what we arrived at, planning to make sure that we could upgrade those 2 initiatives as best we could.
Thank you. I mean, I bring it up because it's been discussed on the board, and that, the science rooms need upgrades. Those are premier rooms that, want to send our kids into college knowing what a real science lab looks like, and at the culinary room for them to qualify for CTE. And even I remember Mr. Feitros mentioning that if we go, residential, it's what is it, penny wise, dollar foolish or something like that, that these are just pieces that are going to fall apart. So I just want to make sure that we put those on the front burner, no pun intended. I also had a couple other questions. One, Carrie, would you happen to know what the breakage or the difference is between the tuition we pay out and the tuition we receive?
Can't really speak to that off the top of my head. You're saying the incoming students from Little Ferry, Pagoda, and Maywood compared to these students that we send out to private?
See, if you don't have the answer right now, that's fine. It's just
I don't have the answer right now, but I can definitely get that to you tomorrow.
And then I guess I have a question for Dr. Haines. With the early childhood director, is this a are we budgeting for this in the event that the consultant, for example, says that this is a viable thing to start in this next year? Or because it just seems like if we're going to have an early childhood director and also a consultant, it seems like one should come first, maybe?
No, absolutely. So the consultant comes first. We're working with that person right now. Well, hopefully that person. She's preparing consultant fees and proposal for us so that we can look at that, and she can look at the PEEA grant, which will have to be submitted. The government here, the state government here is kind of shifting things because they are receiving more money because early childhood education is so important right now. They're trying to get a head start on that, no pun intended. So the consultant comes first, writing the grant, working with community areas and locations and figuring out what's feasible. And the grant has to be submitted in August. The early childhood director doesn't come on until after July, at least. And that person starts, I think this was explained really well by the committee 2 meetings ago, starts looking at hiring teachers, what the credentials are, what the program needs, and all those things that get written into the grant. I'd like to think the two of them collaborate in July and August, but they are 2 different positions, one starting before the other.
So when we talk about viability, it's really how we're going to do this, not whether we're going to do this. To be clear.
Yeah, correct. No, this was a very strong board goal to me from the community, right? My intention is we have something up and running, proof of concept, at least 1 classroom in January.
Thank you.
I've said it many, many, many times. There are all these districts around us who have this going, and our kids need those same opportunities and advantages.
Thank you. And then my last question is, you mentioned that Roosevelt did not qualify for Title I classification. Why is that? I mean, how is Title I determined? Is that by the lunch program or?
Correct. It's determined by parents turning in free and reduced lunch forms. Correct.
Have we not, is our community not turning in enough applications?
Our community is not turning in enough applications.
Okay.
Correct.
I think a donation will be in order for that.
Can I ask on the free and reduced lunch applications, wasn't that affected by COVID? Wasn't everybody entitled to free lunch during the last 2 years?
Yes, everybody was receiving free lunch for 2021 and 21-22.
So wouldn't that affect the number of applications? Why would you apply if everyone was getting it?
No, because if you actually qualify based on income, you would have to fill out an application for it to be considered in the Title I funding.
So they got free lunch without having to fill out the form. So there was no apparent need to them to fill out the form, but it resulted in.
That's probably true.
Okay.
Dr. Haines, for my clarification, because Dr. Martinez said it twice, do we need the commercial equipment to have our program qualify as a CTE?
That is a great question. And I actually checked with the State Department of CTE, the 21st Century Skills Programs. And the answer back is, and it makes sense, right? Absolutely not. Our students currently are earning 9 credits in domestic kitchens, and they've been earning those credits for the past, 4 or 5 years. They do not need a commercial grade kitchen. It is something that I think our community aspires to. And as I said, I've worked with Mrs. Grapstein and Mr. Demikoff to ensure that we have the capital reserve to do it, so we can do it, but it does not affect the program or what the program is. In fact, the state wrote back and said, you guys, they have to come out and check the kitchen and make sure that it's fully functioning so our students can get those credits. And the state said, we already proved your kitchen. No.
I'm not questioning that, so I just wanted clarification because
Sure.
I know we had the pro. I want to make sure we're in good standing.
We are in good standing.
Thank you.
Dr. Haines, do you by chance happen to know what our E rate is at this district?
That's a great question for Mrs. Grapstein and Mrs. Kelly.
Okay, because I think that the free and reduced also helps us with our E-rate, correct? Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
The forms that we're not filling out. So if like we're getting forms and we're at 40%, but let's say we're really at 60%, the E-rate will also
be affected.
The higher the E-rate, will affects a bunch of different expenses that we have, such as all over the budget as it relates to technology and other items. So
Staff.
I think that's something that I think that's something that we really need to push.
I'd agree with you. It's Mrs. Grapstein and I can work together on that. I would agree that's an important focus for us.
We receive reimbursement at about a 60% rate.
I'm sorry, can someone just describe what E-rate is? I'm not familiar with that term.
Would probably
you want me to take that on?
It's
having dealt with this for way too long. So E-rate comes to the district for a couple of reasons. If our students get 60% free and reduced lunch, then there are two levels of E-rate that we can qualify for. One is called connectivity, for example. So if we have a $300,000 a year bill for Verizon, and I think it's less in this district, 60% of that is E-rateable. So you would look at the Verizon bills that are coming in, or however you're connecting and getting your internet bandwidth, and you'd take 60% off the top, and that is paid by the state government called E-rate. E-rate, is it Mrs. Orth didn't ask that. E-rate is paid for by you, the taxpayers. If you look at your bill carefully, your phone and your connectivity home bill, every month, every taxpayer or every person who uses internet service is charged a little thing called Universal Access Fund. And that Universal Access Fund goes into a federal fund, and then it gets parceled out to states and school districts to defray the cost of connecting all students through schools. That's one tier. The second tier is generally there are hardware, networking, and other costs that you can defray against E-rate, such as there was a special E-rate this year that helped us to pay for some of those Chromebooks. Again, at 60%.
And all of that ties back into our parents submitting their reduced and free lunch. Got it.
Carrie, getting back to the Chromebooks, the deployment rate at $5,000, is that, I'm assuming, that deployment software, is that, I'm assuming, allows us to program the computers?
Perhaps it's for.
Is there something that we can program those Chromebooks that we're bringing in instead of having the company program them? Because I thought that was a high cost, no? So the Chromebooks, the new Chromebooks that we get, they're coming in already programmed, right? That's where that, so there's no actual programming, putting the programs into it for the kids. Okay. Okay, so that deployment then for the other house. Okay. All right, thank you.
Can I ask a question about the director for early childhood education and the consultant? You said those are two positions that would that we would both be funding in this budget. And I know that that's one of the big initiatives or goals for the board. But my understanding was that it was meant to not cost the district money because we were supposed to apply for grants for that. And so I feel like this is $200,000 that
Mrs. Orth, right in front. So I'll answer that, Mrs. Orth. When you come back, you can tell me if I answered it correctly. You are correct. It should be taken out of the grant once we submit the grant and it's successfully accepted by the state, and the state says that they can pay for these. I think I'll use a line Mr. Demikoff always uses. You can't always count on grants, and you want to make sure that what you're funding is built into your budget. So I built this into the budget. I'm not sure if it will be used. I'd like to think when the grant kicks in, it will take over and we won't have to use this cost, but I'm not banking on it.
I think that's part of the question or concern is, again, going back to what Michelle said, the goal of the district was early childhood education that is fully funded. So to hire the director before we have funding, like the grant writing, I'm very supportive of, because that's how you get the funding. But to hire the director before we have the grant, then leaves us as out of pocket for the district for things that could be directed elsewhere.
Exactly. And so if we imagine the grant writer is successful, the grant gets approved in August, we plan on starting the program in January, paid, and that pays for the director's position, then we would not use nearly all of that. We might either use a half or a quarter of that. But in my role, I want to make sure it's a guarantee. And so there probably is extra money on that line for sure. Hopefully most of it won't be used.
Dr. Haines, I would imagine that in the job description for the director, as well as the job description for the consultant, is that they get us grant funded, right? I mean, I can't imagine that we're going to pay $140,000 to an individual and who doesn't succeed at getting us grant funded.
I think that's well said. And I'll say what this was said a couple of months ago when there was the great presentation on early childhood education, right? Will the grants pay year after year after year? And Bogota submits the grant every year and the state government pays for it every year. It's kind of an ongoing reoccurring guarantee is how they look at it. But I just want to make sure that we can get up and running successfully.
Hey, Dr. Haines, I just want to follow up from Dr. Martinez's and Mrs. Orr's question regarding the preschool universal pre-K, is that we needed to carve out these two positions specifically as documented and as the presentation was specifically for the universal pre-K. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And when in hopes that this grant does come through, that these, as well as any other teacher hired related to this program, would be covered under that state grant, correct?
Correct. The goal is in January 2023, these expenses come off of our books. That is correct.
Thank you.
I also ask, with regards to that position, I think I've asked this before, but I don't remember the answer. That individual for the early childhood director should be somebody who has a lot of experience with early childhood, correct? And
correct.
This is not a job to be, we're not going to learn on the job.
No, somebody, both early childhood who does universal screening for our kindergartners, who's used to working with parents and making sure the kindergarten registration gets up and running. They are a conduit to our community, to the preschool and to kindergarten. Yes.
No wires.
Three things real quick, all right? Well, that works good. Excellent budget presentation.
Please state your name and your address, sir.
For you, yes. 54 John Rafferty, 54 Euclid Avenue, Ridgefield Park, New Jersey. Excellent budget presentation. $45,000 for a Class B CDL driver with endorsements is a steal. especially now with the shortage of drivers and the cost going up. $45,000 for a Class B driver with those endorsements is a steal, believe me. I have been in the manual transition to all three accountability programs. GPS, we didn't use teacher hardware, we had employee hardware, and what was the third one? We had a GPS, the teacher hardware, and the payroll, exactly. It's rough. You'll need some help when you start it up. You'll be amazed at the people that stand around every day for half an hour before they punch out. All three of these programs will cost you money to start. In 2 years, you won't know what you would have done without them, believe me, because that's the magic word, accountability. And you don't take 100 hours at a time and cut them. You get a half an hour here, half an hour there. Then you find a person who's over here and this guy's trying to, believe me, it will pay for itself. Last thing that I find very frustrating is we're looking at spending all this money on the pre-K, and on the other side, we're talking about new students coming into the district that we don't have room for. In fact, we're willing to go down to renting a can for storage. So I think the first thing you really need to look at is, how are you physically going to do this? Where is the room going to come from? Mr. Cathcart told me he'll give us a report. I'm sure he tells you what's coming in and where we're going to put them. And on the other hand, we're talking about paying $200,000 out for a position that we don't even know we can do yet. Because Bogota gets their grant every year doesn't mean Ridgefield Park will get their grant every year. Okay, now we don't have the money to fix the classrooms, which should be our first priority before pre-K. We could use that for the science rooms. So I would just ask that the board look at that, look at it. And I can only tell you from experience, again, the accountability systems, without question, it's the way to go. Believe me.
Let me answer the question on the new students and what's going on. We know there's many projects being built in the community. And what we've done as a board is to effectively look at how do we plan for the future. So these projects will take probably 5 to 10 years to build. So whatever board after us will have a protocol to follow. That's not an immediate thing, but those projects are being discussed, which would be 1,550 units. The new master plan is calling for a dual use, which is residential and commercial. So we have to make plans. So as a board, we decided, well, we're going to follow up these, we're going to meet with these people, go to planning board meetings and plan for the future. So who's ever on this board will have something to follow to look at when these projects are started.
And I just wanted to say quickly, we've explained in several other meetings the plan to bring other organizations with our, if we get the grant for pre-K, that we'd be able to use other types of school and educational places to share these, locations. And that was a, part of a community plan that several other communities have as well.
I'd like to move on to resolutions at this time. So being that we don't have the printouts, I'll just read them. So So, Mr. Cathcart, can you move buildings and grounds, sir?
I move BG 12.
Second.
Are there any questions on BG 12?
This is for the unit ventilators, correct?
Correct.
This is part of our budget?
It's part of, it's being funded by ARP and ESSER.
Thank you so much.
I'll take the vote. Mr. Cathcart?
Yes.
Mr. Rosselli?
Yes.
Mr. Phytros?
Yes.
Mr. Gibbons?
Yes.
Mr. Gomes?
Yes.
Mrs. McNeil?
Yes.
Dr. Martinez?
Yes.
Mrs. Orth?
Yes.
Mrs. Rodriguez?
Yes.
And President Fernandez?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Right. Moving on to finance and insurance. Trustee Gomes?
I so move FI 217.
Second.
Are there any questions on FI 217? Seeing none. Mr. Gomes?
Yes.
Mr. Cathcart?
Yes.
Mr. Phytros?
Yes.
Mr. Gibbons?
I'd like to thank Mrs. Grapstein for all of her hard work on the budget. Thank you, Dr. Haines, for your leadership. And I'm going to abstain from the vote.
Okay. Mrs. McNeil?
Yes.
Dr. Martinez?
Yes.
Mrs. Orth?
Yes.
Mrs. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Mr. Rosselli?
Yes.
And President Fernandez?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Can I move to adjourn?
Yes, and I'll second.
Can I say something first?
Oh, of course.
Quickly, I'm sorry I'm remote tonight. I wanted to thank the board for setting a very solid vision of accomplishing this, of all the work that Mr. Demikoff and Mrs. Grabstein and everybody did in the district to ensure that these funds were readily available to support the vision that the board has set, and for the collaborative, collegial conversations that we had in working on this budget. And I look forward to those conversations as we move the district forward in the next 6 months and 12 months to get a status check to see how we're doing and how we're really meeting those needs. But I wanted to thank everybody. I feel very proud to be part of what we're doing in the district. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Haines and Mrs. Grabstein as well. I think this this budget tells us a real strong story about what's happening down in this district.
Thank you.
And now I'll move to adjourn.
And I'll second.
I second.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.